There are moments in life when you feel the atmosphere around you shifting, when your spirit can sense that something is about to change. It's not just another day, it's a divine signal that the season of waiting, stretching, and believing is reaching its turning point. This is one of those moments. Congratulations, not because everything is perfect, but because you are standing at the edge of transformation. You've prayed, cried, and endured storms that were meant to break you, but instead they refined you. You've wrestled with confusion, walked through silent seasons, and carried the weight of promises that felt delayed, yet here you are, still standing. This word isn't about what's coming far off in the future. It's about recognizing that what you've been asking for is already unfolding. Before October 10, something divine is being released, not by coincidence, but by alignment. This message is a reminder that you are not behind, you are right on time. The heavens are congratulating you because you have reached a spiritual checkpoint. The warfare you faced wasn't for nothing. The closed doors weren't rejection, they were redirection. Every no was guiding you toward the place where the yes would carry glory. You are walking into a moment that was written before you ever existed, and God is saying, congratulations, you made it. The shift you feel is confirmation, not confusion. There's a reason why lately your spirit has felt unsettled, not in a negative way, but in that quiet stirring that makes you feel like something is coming, though you can't quite name it. That's not anxiety, that's the spiritual vibration of transition. Every major move in your life starts with that subtle tension between where you are and where you're about to go. You've been sensing it in your sleep, in your conversations, and even in your silence. You can feel that you're no longer comfortable in the same spaces, no longer content with what used to satisfy you, no longer able to ignore the pull towards something greater. That's not confusion. That's heaven's way of signaling that the atmosphere has changed. Confusion says you're lost. Confirmation says you've been located. You've been found by destiny, and it's gently nudging you forward. God doesn't always announce the next chapter with loud signs. Sometimes it's the inner unease that tells you the page is already turning. You might feel restless, but it's because you're being called to move. Every time your heart says something's off, it might not be wrongness. It might be readiness. It's the divine tension of elevation. You're not breaking down, you're breaking through. This is the season when you stop doubting what you discern. For too long, you've second-guessed your spirit because what you feel didn't match what you saw. You looked around and saw no progress, yet deep inside you knew something was shifting. That's faith trying to mature inside of you. Faith isn't built in evidence, it's built in sensitivity. When you begin to trust what your spirit senses, you align faster with what God is doing. You'll realize that what you called confusion was actually confirmation dressed in disguise. There's a reason the ground beneath you started shaking. When the earth moves, it's not just to destroy, but to make room for something new. Spiritually, that's what's happening right now. The old structures in your life are being unsettled because new ones are being planted. The places that once fit your capacity are now too small for your calling. It's not that you've outgrown people or environments. It's that your assignment has expanded beyond the boundaries of your comfort. You're not meant to fit anymore. You're meant to flow. The shift you feel isn't punishment, it's preparation. God is rearranging everything so that when the next opportunity appears, you won't hesitate. You've already been made uncomfortable enough to move when called. You may not see all the details yet, but that's intentional. If you could see the full picture, you might cling to what was instead of stepping into what's becoming. This season requires trust more than understanding. It requires obedience more than clarity. When the Spirit whispers, go, it rarely comes with a map. But every obedient step reveals the next one. You're being invited to move by faith and not by sight, not because sight is bad, but because faith keeps you aligned with timing. Sight tells you what is, faith shows you what's coming. That's why the stirring inside you doesn't make logical sense, because it's not supposed to. It's spiritual. And when heaven is moving on your behalf, your natural environment won't reflect it immediately. The shift may also feel lonely. Don't mistake that isolation for abandonment. Sometimes when God is elevating you, he must remove the voices that would distract you from hearing his next instruction. Silence becomes sacred because it sharpens your discernment. You're learning to hear the difference between emotion and revelation, between your will and his plan. And when you master that distinction, you'll stop fighting the shift and start flowing with it. The confirmation isn't always a sign in the sky. Sometimes it's the peace that arrives after you say yes. You'll feel it in your bones when you stop resisting what's inevitable. You'll know it's right because even though it's unfamiliar, it feels necessary. You'll feel lighter, freer, even in uncertainty. That's how divine confirmation feels. It doesn't always answer your questions, but it quiets your spirit. It reminds you that the shaking is not to scare you, but to settle you into something greater. So when you feel the shift, don't panic. Celebrate it quietly. It means you've been noticed, chosen, and positioned. The shift isn't random. It's heaven's announcement that your next chapter has already begun. Hidden growth prepared you for visible elevation. You may not realize it yet, but the season where nothing seemed to move was the very ground where your roots were growing deep. When life looked still and your prayers seemed unanswered, heaven was busy building your foundation. You were being stretched in silence, tested in private, and refined in ways that only time and pressure could accomplish. What you called delay was actually development. What felt like being overlooked was God protecting you from being seen before you were ready. Because true elevation doesn't begin in the spotlight, it begins in the soil. Think about it. Before a tree rises high, its roots must first go deep. The depth of its roots determines the height it can reach. And in the same way, the quiet seasons of your life weren't wasted. They were the seasons when God was strengthening what no one else could see. The frustration, the stillness, the hiddenness, all of it was training your faith, teaching your character, and preparing your heart to carry what you once prayed for. You didn't fail, you were being fortified. You weren't forgotten, you were being formed. Every tear watered your purpose. Every disappointment was a lesson. Every not yet was divine protection. Sometimes God hides you because visibility too soon can destroy what maturity is meant to sustain. When you look back, you'll see that the doors that didn't open then would have crushed you if they had. The relationships that ended were necessary exits for peace to enter. The waiting wasn't punishment. It was positioning. You were being groomed for a level that required discipline, endurance, and humility. You may have thought that nothing was happening, but hidden seasons are heaven's workshops. It's where God molds your resilience, shapes your discernment, and gives you the strength to stand under the weight of the blessing. Because promotion without preparation can become a burden. There are blessings that require backbone, and you were developing one. You learned how to stand when support disappeared. You learned how to pray without proof. You learned how to believe when belief hurt. That's the kind of growth no one sees, but it's the kind that sustains real elevation. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't look like miracles at all. They look like discipline. They look like showing up every day, even when you feel unseen. They look like holding on to faith when nothing seems to move. That's the training ground of champions. You were growing in strength, patience, and identity. And now, as the new season unfolds, the world will finally see what's been forming in secret. You're not who you were when the silence began. There's wisdom in your words, authority in your prayers, and peace in your presence. That's what hidden growth produces. Transformation from the inside out. The problem with visibility is that people only see the fruit, not the root. They see the success, but not the sacrifice, the shine, but not the shaping. But God saw every part of it. He saw you pushing through discouragement, fighting doubt, worshiping through pain, and refusing to quit. That's what made you ready. Elevation is not about being seen. It's about being stable enough to stay when you get there. God will not promote you until he can trust that the weight of glory won't crush your character. So if you're stepping into a visible season now, know that you've earned it through endurance. This is your emergence moment, the time when the hidden work becomes visible results. but don't rush it. Let the process finish what it started. The same way a butterfly can't skip the cocoon, you can't skip the hidden stages of destiny. The cocoon may look like confinement, but it's actually transformation. You entered one way, but you're coming out with wings. That's what the unseen work does. It gives you the strength to soar. The people who once questioned where you were will soon see what God was doing while you were quiet. The very seasons that made you feel behind are the ones that placed you ahead, because hidden growth doesn't waste time, it redeems it. It multiplies your results when your season of visibility comes. You'll accomplish in months what used to take years because you've already done the unseen work. That's why this next level will feel lighter. You've already carried the weight of preparation. So, when people begin to notice you, don't apologize for the glow. Don't downplay what God has developed in you. You've survived silence, pruning, and pressure. You've grown roots that can't be shaken by storms. You've become stable enough to stand tall. This is not luck. This is fruit, the kind that only comes from hidden obedience and silent growth. You are ready because you endured what others walked away from. You waited, you grew, and now you're about to rise. Divine timing is catching up with your obedience. There's a rhythm in heaven that doesn't always match the clock we live by. You've been faithful in seasons that made no sense, obedient when no one was watching, and patient when everything around you said, hurry up. You kept walking even when the path was dim, trusting that every small step in faith was building something eternal. And now, what you've sown in obedience is aligning with the moment heaven prepared for you. Divine timing isn't delayed. It's deliberate. It waits until your heart, your maturity, and your surroundings are all ready to sustain the blessing. What you thought was a pause was actually preparation for synchronization. You see, God never forgets obedience. Every yes you whispered when fear told you no, every act of faith that no one else saw, it's all been recorded. Your sacrifices were not in vain. They were deposits into your destiny. There's a moment when heaven says, now, and everything you've done in private begins to align publicly. That's the moment when obedience meets opportunity. You can't rush it, but you can recognize it. The signs are subtle doors that used to be closed suddenly open. Connections appear that make sense only in hindsight, and favor starts following you where you once faced resistance. That's not luck. It's timing catching up with your obedience. It's important to remember that obedience often feels costly before it feels rewarding. You've had to let go of things you loved, walk away from comfort, and make choices that looked foolish to others. You've endured seasons where you couldn't explain your decisions because what God told you didn't fit logic. But obedience doesn't need approval, it needs trust. Every time you said yes to God and no to compromise, you were aligning your life with His calendar, not your own. The beauty of divine timing is that it's never early, never late, but always perfect. When it arrives, it redeems every second you thought was wasted. There were moments when it felt like your obedience didn't matter, when others seemed to get ahead while you were still waiting. But what you didn't see was that heaven was stacking blessings behind the scenes. Divine timing is like a dam holding back water. It looks like nothing's happening, but once it's released, everything flows at once. Suddenly, opportunities, relationships, and breakthroughs arrive in clusters, and you realize it wasn't that God forgot. It's that He was aligning everything to arrive in harmony. You weren't being punished, you were being positioned. Sometimes obedience requires you to move before you see. You had to trust that God's go was enough, even when you didn't know where it would lead. Like Abraham, you walked toward a promise that wasn't visible yet, believing that God would reveal the next step along the way. That's the essence of divine timing. It rewards movement, not hesitation. When heaven sees obedience, it responds with alignment. Every time you chose faith over fear, you shifted the atmosphere. You made room for the miraculous by refusing to settle for what was comfortable. Now the time has come when your obedience is being honored. What used to be resistance is becoming ease. Where you once had to fight for every inch, doors are now opening without you knocking. That's the reward of patience and obedience. You're stepping into the divine acceleration, where things that took years to build are established in moments. But it's not random. It's the harvest of consistency. You didn't quit, Even when quitting would have been easier, you kept sowing when the soil looked dry, and now the rain has finally arrived. Don't be surprised if what you prayed for comes faster than you expected. When divine timing catches up with obedience, things move quickly. People will call it sudden, but you'll know it's not. It's been years of hidden work meeting the perfect moment of manifestation. That's why you can't envy someone else's timeline. What's yours has been tailored for you. No one can occupy your space, speak your word, or receive your promise. What God has aligned for you will not miss you, even if it has to circle back around. So stand firm. Keep your heart humble as favor increases. The same obedience that positioned you will be the same posture that sustains you. Don't let comfort make you careless. Stay sensitive to the spirit that guided you through the waiting, because divine timing doesn't end with one blessing. It introduces a new rhythm of grace. You've reached a place where everything you've endured is about to make sense. The closed doors, the delays, the disappointments, they were never denials. They were the pauses that protected your purpose. And now the pace of heaven is shifting in your favor. The timing you've been praying for has finally found you. Every seed planted in tears is ready to bloom in joy. Every yes you gave in faith is being multiplied. You didn't miss your moment. Your moment was waiting for you to be ready. Divine timing is not catching up late. It's arriving right on schedule, bringing with it everything you were promised and more. What you lost made room for what's next. Loss is one of the hardest parts of growth because it feels like subtraction, but in the spiritual realm, it's often the beginning of multiplication. There were things, people, and seasons that had to leave your life. Not because you weren't worthy of keeping them, but because they couldn't carry you into your next level. You may have cried over what walked away, questioned why certain doors closed, and wondered if something went wrong. But what if everything that left was actually divine clearance? What if the emptiness you felt was preparation for fullness? God never subtracts without a plan to multiply. Sometimes what feels like loss is actually a sacred exchange. Heaven is rearranging your life to make space for something greater. When you hold on to what's no longer aligned, it blocks what's trying to enter. There were relationships that ended not because of betrayal, but because their purpose expired. There were jobs you lost not because you failed, but because your calling outgrew that space. Every goodbye, every rejection, every ending was permission for something new to begin. You didn't lose, you were released. Released from what couldn't see your value, released from what couldn't sustain your vision, released from what was too small for your destiny. Loss forces you to confront attachment. It asks you whether you trust God more than comfort. It reveals whether your faith is based on outcomes or on His sovereignty. Because it's easy to believe when everything is stable, but real trust is proven in the shaking. You discovered who you are not by what stayed, but by what survived leaving. You found a strength you didn't know existed when you were stripped of what you thought you needed. That's where maturity is born, in the quiet aftermath of loss, when all you have left is faith. You may have felt like something was stolen, but heaven doesn't allow theft. It allows exchange. Every loss creates room for divine replacement, and what God replaces is always greater. You might not see it yet, but the new space in your life isn't emptiness. It's potential. It's an open field waiting for new harvest. God couldn't plant fresh blessings in crowded soil, so He had to uproot what was overgrown. He had to clear the space so that what's next could flourish. What left was never meant to last forever. It served its purpose, and now something better is scheduled to arrive. Think of the pruning process. A gardener cuts not to destroy the plant, but to help it grow stronger. The branches that look alive but bear no fruit are removed so the nutrients can flow to what's truly productive. In the same way, the losses in your life were pruning moments. They looked painful, but they were purposeful. God was trimming away what was draining your energy, what was dulling your discernment, what was limiting your capacity. Every cut hurt, but it made you healthier. You may not have understood it at the time, but the pruning protected your promise. Sometimes loss teaches you what love cannot. It shows you the power of letting go without bitterness, of surrendering without fear. You've learned how to release gracefully, how to thank God for what was while making room for what's coming. You stopped begging people to stay who were meant to go, and in doing so, you freed yourself. That's spiritual maturity, realizing that not every ending is a failure and not every absence is abandonment. Some exits are divine strategy. When you look back now, you'll see that every loss carried a lesson. Losing the job taught you resilience. Losing the friend taught you discernment. Losing the relationship taught you identity. Nothing was wasted. Every piece of pain was recycled into wisdom. And that wisdom is now your currency for the next season. You are richer because of what you lost. You are stronger because of what you survived. You are clearer because of what you released. The breaking was only temporary. The becoming is forever. So stop mourning what has already served its purpose. What's gone created the vacancy that your blessing needed. You've been decluttered by destiny. The weight you lost wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God knew that what's next requires lighter hands and freer hearts. If you had carried everything with you, it would have slowed your rise. Some things had to leave so you could finally lift. You're entering a season where the loss will make sense. You'll see how every closed door redirected you to divine opportunity. You'll thank God not just for what he gave, but for what he took away. Because sometimes protection feels like pain. Sometimes love looks like loss. And when what's next finally arrives, you'll understand that it couldn't have fit if the old had stayed. So don't fear the empty spaces. They are the womb of new beginnings. What you lost wasn't the end. It was the invitation to the next chapter that's already waiting to unfold. Don't shrink when favor finds you. There comes a time when the very thing you prayed for finally shows up, and instead of excitement, you feel hesitation. You wonder if you're truly ready, worthy, or capable of carrying it. You question whether the blessing is really meant for you or if someone else would do it better. But this is the moment when heaven is saying, you're not an imposter. You're chosen. Don't shrink back when favor calls your name. You've already paid the price in private. The waiting, the tears, the obedience, the tests, they all prepared you for this moment. This isn't luck. It's divine recognition. Favor doesn't arrive because you're perfect. It comes because you're positioned. You've been faithful when no one applauded you, humble when no one acknowledged you, and steadfast when the process felt endless. That's what qualifies you for visibility. When favor finds you, it won't ask your permission. It will simply announce that it's your time. And the test will be whether you believe it. Because favor doesn't only elevate, it exposes. It puts you in rooms you once prayed to enter, but now must have the courage to stand in. There's a quiet danger in shrinking when favor arrives. If you're not careful, you'll try to hide behind humility, thinking that playing small makes you safe. But humility is not denying your gift. It's recognizing the giver. Shrinking is fear disguised as modesty. You weren't meant to dim down to make others comfortable. God didn't lift you so you could disappear in the crowd. You are meant to reflect his glory boldly, not timidly. Your light doesn't dishonor God, it reveals him. The truth is, favor feels uncomfortable because it stretches your identity. You've been used to surviving, and now God is calling you to shine. You've been in battle mode for so long that peace feels foreign. But don't sabotage what you've been praying for. When favor opens a door, walk through it with confidence. Don't explain it, justify it, or apologize for it. Just walk in it, because every time you downplay your purpose, you dishonor the process that got you here. The same people who watched you struggle will now watch you soar, and that's not arrogance. That's testimony. You are living proof that faith works, that obedience produces fruit, and that grace can locate anyone anywhere. You don't have to be perfect to be chosen. God uses flawed people to display flawless favor. Your story, your scars, your survival, that's your evidence. Don't silence it to make others comfortable. The ones who misunderstand your elevation were never meant to understand your assignment. You might feel the tension between gratitude and guilt, grateful that favor found you, but guilty because others are still waiting. But you can't apologize for answered prayers. Instead, let your favor become proof that theirs is possible too. Favor is not meant to isolate you. It's meant to inspire others. You carry the responsibility of visibility to show that it's possible to rise with integrity, to be blessed and still be kind, to be elevated and still be humble. You are not called to hide the glory. You're called to handle it well. When favor finds you, the enemy will try to whisper that you don't belong. He'll remind you of your past, your flaws, and your failures. But remind yourself, you didn't earn this. You were entrusted with it. That's the difference. Favor is never random. It locates those who've been refined by fire. It comes to those who didn't quit when it was hard. It rests on those who stayed faithful when it didn't make sense. So when it finally shows up, don't question it. Receive it as validation that your private obedience has reached heaven's recognition. Remember that favor carries weight. It's not just about status or visibility. It's about stewardship. The favor that found you is not only for you, it's meant to flow through you. You're blessed to be a blessing, positioned to open doors for others, and anointed to shift atmospheres. The platform you've been given isn't a reward. It's a responsibility, and you're ready for it because you've been tested in silence long enough to handle the spotlight with grace. So stand tall when favor calls your name. Don't shrink back. Don't apologize for shining. You are not taking up too much space. You're finally taking up the space you were born to fill. You are not stealing anyone's opportunity. You're walking in your own lane. You don't have to explain why it's happening now. It's happening because it's time. Heaven's calendar has reached your name, and this is your moment to own it fully. You've cried, grown, and endured too much to minimize yourself now. The same strength that helped you survive will help you stand. The favor that found you is evidence that you are ready, worthy, and capable. Don't shrink, rise. Because when you step into what God has prepared for you without fear, you don't just win for yourself. You remind the world what divine favor really looks like. Celebrate even before the manifestation. Real faith isn't waiting for the evidence to appear before you rejoice. It's learning to celebrate while the miracle is still in motion. It's the ability to praise in the middle, to dance in the delay, to smile in the stretch. Celebration is not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about declaring that you trust the one who is perfecting everything. The most powerful moments in your spiritual journey aren't the ones where the promise finally arrives. They're the moments where you praise anyway, because you know that what's unseen is already set in motion. When you celebrate before you see it, you're telling heaven, I believe you even when I can't trace you. That kind of faith moves mountains. It shifts atmospheres. It breaks the grip of doubt that tries to silence your confidence, because gratitude isn't just a response to blessing, it's a magnet for more of it. When your heart celebrates before the evidence appears, it proves that your faith is rooted in God's nature, not in your circumstances. It shows that your joy isn't tied to outcomes, but to the certainty of His goodness. There were seasons when you had every reason to give up, yet you still found a reason to be thankful. You thank God not for what was finished, but for what was promised. You lifted your hands even when your heart was heavy, and that was worship in its purest form. That kind of celebration builds a foundation of endurance. It keeps you grounded when life tries to shake you. Because praise isn't just noise, it's a weapon. It confuses the enemy who expected you to crumble. It reminds your spirit that victory doesn't start at the finish line. It begins in your posture of faith. Sometimes you have to celebrate prophetically. You have to look at the empty space and thank God for the thing that's on its way. You have to talk as if it's done, walk as if it's here, and think as if the promise has already manifested. That's not delusion. That's declaration. Heaven responds to expectation. The moment you start celebrating ahead of time, you align your heart with divine timing. You create an atmosphere where blessings can land because you've made room for them with gratitude. It's easy to rejoice when the healing comes, the job arrives, the relationship restores. But what about when the silence stretches longer than you expected? What about when the doors stay closed? When the prayers seem unanswered, when the plan feels unclear? That's where true faith is revealed, in the praise that doesn't depend on proof. You celebrate because you trust that the story isn't over. You celebrate because delay doesn't mean denial. You celebrate because God has never failed to make good on his word. When you praise before the manifestation, you train your spirit to see from a higher perspective. You stop focusing on what's missing and start magnifying what's promised. You begin to understand that everything you're waiting for already exists in the unseen. Your celebration becomes the bridge between what's spoken and what's seen. It's the language of belief. The sound that says, I know it's coming, so I'll rejoice right now. There's power in early celebration. It keeps your heart soft when the waiting feels hard. It builds anticipation instead of anxiety. It keeps you in rhythm with heaven's timing instead of rushing your own. When you celebrate in advance, you shift from worry to worship. You no longer beg for the blessing, you prepare for it. You act like someone who already knows the outcome because you do. You know the one who promised it, and he has never lied. Even Jesus gave thanks before the miracle. Before Lazarus walked out of the tomb, gratitude was spoken. Before the loaves and fish multiplied, thanksgiving was given. That pattern wasn't accidental. It was revelation. Thanksgiving precedes transformation. Celebration opens the door to manifestation. What you thank God for before it happens creates space for it to appear. So in this moment, while it's still uncertain, dare to rejoice. Celebrate the promise as if it's already yours. Walk around your life declaring it's already done. Speak it until your atmosphere shifts. Praise until your perspective aligns with heaven. Because when you learn to celebrate early, you live in constant expectation of God's goodness. The enemy wants you to wait until everything looks right before you celebrate, but faith tells you to celebrate until everything becomes right. You don't need to see the rain to prepare for the harvest. You just need to believe that the clouds are forming. Joy in the waiting room is the loudest declaration of trust. It tells heaven you're ready. It tells the storm it's temporary. It tells your heart that the promise still stands. So lift your voice before the answer comes. Smile before the shift happens. Rejoice before the door opens. Because every act of early celebration is a seed, and soon that seed will bloom into everything you've been believing for. Your breakthrough isn't waiting for the right time. It's waiting for your right response. Celebrate now because manifestation is already moving toward you.